Hello, everybody. My name is Spoons Rattling, back from my involuntary hiatus, and I'm back with a fun video I've wanted to make for a while, seeing what the absolute cheapest army is you can make for every faction in 40k in 10th edition. Uh, let's get into it. This, again, isn't focused on being a competitive or an effective or well-balanced list. This is purely how much value can you get for your money to make an entire army on the cheap. And I'm not going to be using discount sellers. If you want to account for discounts, just subtract 10 to 15% off of all the prices. I'm going to be using Games Workshop's web store and prices, as they tend to be flat fives, as well as being a complete catalog of everything every army can use, with some exceptions like Drukhari, but that's a whole other video. The poster boys first, we have the Space Marines. As expected, the Space Marines, being the most popular, have a lot of value. We'll see how they rank at the end, but for just over 2k points for about $572, surely they'll do pretty well. Again, I think you could get them cheaper, but this was the first army I did, and I certainly made some mistakes. But in terms of purchases, I think Horus Heresy Age of Darkness still works exceptionally well. You can't use the Spartan, but you can use everything else. The Contemptor's on the same base as the Venerable Dread. So if you wanted to, you could sell some of that stuff and recoup on investment, but that's not part of this video. Next, you have Combat Patrol Dark Angels being the densest points per dollar combat patrol, from my estimations, not including any Legion-specific units. So no Sword Brethren, no Neophytes, etc. from, say, Black Templars. And to round out the list, I got the Special Weapons Upgrade set to convert one of the squads from Slaves to Darkness into a Hellblaster squad. And then I think the Legion Cataphracti Praetor and Traveling Consul are more just so nice on top, as they give you a Terminator Captain, because the 40k Terminator Captain is not for sale for some reason. Regardless, 2k points, $572, not too bad. The only other Loyalist Marines we're doing, the Grey Knights. The Grey Knights are the only Loyalist Marines we're doing aside from the base, as they use an almost entirely unique roster of characters. Not characters, entire unique roster of units, excluding some vehicles. And them being extremely elite, it's no surprise that they do better than the normal Space Marines. For 2,000 points, you're paying $480 just using 3 Combat Patrol Grey Knights, which you are going to max out by making 3 Grandmaster Dread Knights, and then 15 Interceptors and 15 Paladins. Which is quite actually, that's pretty damn good value for money, putting them in first place in our list so far. Next, we have a notoriously expensive faction, the Sisters of Battle. But in this little silly competition we're doing, we have their extremely strong combat patrol. But even still, for just around 2,000 points, you're paying $715 by buying their 4 combat patrols and 1 Paragon war suit, maxing everything out that you can, and that gives you a list. While it may not be super strong, it is in fact their cheapest list. Next, we have the exact opposite, and being the notorious cheap faction in this game, with their models being expensive and you often not needing that many. And in this case, for 2,000 points, or just under, about 5 points if I'm not misremembering, you're paying $365 for 2 Combat Patrol Custodes and 1 Trajan Valorous. And you max out as many characters as you can from the Combat Patrols. This puts them in a far first place lead above the Grey Knights by just over $100, $115 ahead. Unsurprising, but it would have been funny if they were, say, ranked worse than anyone else. Next, we're back to an infamously expensive faction, the Admech, and this has only gotten worse for them as their combat patrol sucks now. I mean, it wasn't great before, but it really sucks now. But if we spam their most points-dense unit, which is the Castellan robots, for 1980 points, it costs a pretty hefty 760, putting it behind the Sisters and in dead last. But to do this, you're going to need to buy 6 Castellan robots, 3 Cataphron Breachers, Call, and a Tech Priest Manipulus, and just run everything from those for your cheapest Admech army, which is still not that cheap. But it's not as bad as I thought. I honestly thought they would be closer to almost $1,000 or something. And we have the other very, very expensive Imperial Army, But they do have some advantages in having much more giant centerpiece models than the Admech or sisters. And for just over 2,100 points, which you could certainly get lower for less money, I think you'd have to do some finagling. But you're going to just buy 3 Storm Swords, a Rogel Dorn, and Combat Patrol Imperial Guards. You just got to leave out the field weapons, whatever they're called, field artillery. But the Storm Sword's the most expensive Baneblade. Rogel Dorn has great points per dollar, and Combat Patrol Imperial Guard gives you your character and rounds out the list. Next, we have an Imperial faction notorious for being pretty affordable, the Imperial and Chaos Knights. And the funny thing is, even though this isn't supposed to be a competitive list, this is much closer than a lot of these lists have been to being competitive. Just using the Castellan as it's the densest points we can get. We buy 3 of them and 1 box of Armigers. You can run them as either, they cost the same, and you'll be at 1995 points. But for $645, it puts them fairly middle of the pack in this maximum value video. Now we're on to the Forces of Chaos with the Demons of the Warp. Demons are pretty much 4 armies wrapped into one, so I will not be doing a list for, Tzeentch, Slaanesh, and Nurgle, as they don't have any value-added boxes. It's just going to be spamming 3 of their greater demons and their named variant. And then the biggest thing they have aside from that. But in terms of just demons as a wider umbrella, Khorne unsurprisingly takes it for 1940 points for $520. Using their amazing Combat Patrol demons and 1 Skull Taker, you can build your list for surprisingly cheap, putting them in, I believe, 3rd place if I'm not mistaken. Next, we have the traders, the Chaos Space Marines, and much like their loyalist brothers, tend to be quite good on the points per dollar front. And when we run the numbers, if we use the Tartarus or Cataphracti Terminators from the Horus Heresy, which give you 10 instead of 5 for 1.5 the price, you use them, 1 Abaddon, and the Combat Patrol, run everything you get, you'll be at just about 2,000 points. And you'll have a lot of Terminators, which of course I quite like. But this does put them in, I believe, 3rd place. Next, we have the Death Guard, which are Space Marines, yes, but their Plague Marines tend to be quite cheap. Their Combat Patrol is quite bad, and a lot of, even Mortarion in this edition, his points per dollar isn't actually that great. But we are still going to use both of them, as they're really the only dense points per dollars we can get, aside from Blightlord Terminators, which we buy 5 of, and then we do Combat Patrol Death Guard, and then 1 Mortarion and 1 Blight Hauler to roll out the list to 2,000 points for $659. And you're just going to run everything except the Typhuses you get from the extra Combat Patrol Death Guard. Next, we have the book nerds of the Chaos Warp, the Thousand Sons. They are similar to Death Guard in having a god-awful Combat Patrol, which I doubt would make it into the list. And surprisingly, it doesn't. But unlike the Death Guard, the Thousand Sons Marines tend to be quite expensive in terms of points. And the best example of that is Scarab Occult Terminators, rocking 6 boxes of them for 500, 6 of them, 1 box of Exalted Sorcerers and Magnus the Red. You're going to run everything except 1 Sorcerer, and that will give you 1950 points for $590, which is a Thousand Sons list I'd probably quite like. Lastly, for the Forces of Chaos, we have the World Eaters. You are going to look at these guys compared to their other Trader Legions. They have a great Combat Patrol with very dense points per dollars and lots of models. And it's going to be their big saving grace. Because Angron, again, not the greatest points per dollar. And for this 1940 point list for $540, we're going to use 1 box of Terminators, and then 3 Combat Patrols, and just max it out with Lord Invo and then the rest. Leading to a very hoardy, but very thematically proper World Eaters list. On to the forces of the Xenos, we have the Eldar, or Eldari, depending on your persuasion. The Eldar not only almost always have extremely high points per model for their size, but they have a great Combat Patrol and some insane deals for value in terms of points per dollars. For a smooth 2,000 points, it'll cost you $570. With 3 combat patrols, the Incarn and Eldred. The Incarn, by the way, is $55 for 350 points, putting him at over $6 per 6 points per dollar, making him just an insanely good deal. And again, you're just going to run everything we bought. These guys, again, I did not realize just how effective the Incarn was in terms of points per dollar. If you're trying to get an Eldar army on the go quickly, buy the Incarn. Now we have the flip side of that, the Duari, Eldar, but most of their units aren't very expensive because of recent points drops. But also, they have one of the best combat patrols in the game, but outside of the combat patrol, they lack any big centerpieces, which definitely hurts them in the ratings. But for 2,000 points on the dot for $700, you buy 3 Razor Wing jet fighters, 3 combat patrol Drukaris, and 1 Venom to round out the list. Again, run everything that you get. Then we have perhaps the most infamously expensive faction in this game, the Genestealer Colts. They are famed for expensive kits with low points per dollar, but they have the best combat patrol in the game, clocking in at 655 points in 1 box. So tempting it is that I might just start it myself. And much like the Custodes, you only need to use their combat patrol. For $480, you can have 1965 points, making them oddly quite cheap if you were just using the combat patrol. And that means you're just buying 3 combat patrols and running everything, and you're good. Simple as that. It's really quite beautiful, honestly. This puts them in, around 5th place or so, or 4th place, something along those lines. But the Genestealer Colts ended up being one of the cheaper armies in this faction. And on the flip side, we have the Leagues of Votan, which are not only quite expensive, model-wise, their units are quite cheap, and their combat patrol doesn't really include anything that points dense. So, this leads to the Leagues of Votan being leagues behind other factions. For 1990 points, you'd be paying $840, placing them in dead last. This is going to be just 3 combat patrols, 5 boxes of Hearthguard, and 1 Hearthkin Warrior to round out the list to 1990 points. And you do have to build one of your calls as Uthar the Destined. So, that's a shad sewing from the Angry Space Dwarves. Next, we have the Necrons, which, much like their ancient enemy, the Eldar, have a pretty big bonus, but they don't have a combat patrol, and their new combat patrol is quite weak. Set that aside. They have some of the densest points per dollars in the Resin Catan shards, being $50 and all over 300 points. You're going to use them, and then a couple Titanic units, and we're pretty much done. Using 2 Obelisk and Transcendent Catan, as the Transcendent Catan does not have the Epic Hero keyword, you can bring multiple. You're going to buy the Nightbringer and the Deceiver, and then a Luminor Zeres to round out the list, leading to a 7-model, 2,000 point list for $500. Again, the Resin Catan shards, buy them while you can. They are insane value for money, and, actually, they are coming out with the new codex. So this is a cheat code to getting a huge chunk of your army done for like $100. May not be the most competitively viable, but it's useful for just bulking out your list. Next we have my personal favorite, the greenest and the best, the Orcs. The Orcs are famed for many things, being the best faction in the game, being funny, having really cool models, and being expensive. But are they really expensive? Actually, you'd be quite surprised. The Orcs, as popular as they are, obviously get a lot of love from Games Workshop. And that includes having the single biggest plastic kit GW makes, the Stampa. It came out over a decade ago and is actually quite cheap. And the Stampa has one of the densest points per dollar at over 5, because it is 800 points. And using only 4 models to reach 2,000 points for $415, putting them just behind the Banana Hat Boys in cost. And miles ahead in mod count, except everyone but the Knights. They have 1 Ghazghkull, 1 Beast Boss on Squigosaur, and 2 Stampas for a whopping 4-model list, making them the smallest army in this, but also the most points dense of anyone. Bet you didn't expect that coming. And we, second to last, have the British Gundams, the Tau Empire, and much like their demiurge friend, the Leagues, of course, they have a mediocre combat patrol in terms of points, but do have a much larger range, including the Stump-Armed Storm Surge. which is really their only saving grace. And saving grace, I use that term lightly, because for 2,000 points, you are paying a whopping $875, putting them even behind the Votan. I guess the good friends stick together. You're going to buy 2 combat patrols and 3 Storm Surge, max it out. That's really a pathetic showing from the Tau. I was hoping they would do better. And finally, we have the Tyranids, the grimliest of them all. They're famed for 2 kind of playstyles, Nidzilla and Endless Swarm. Let's see which style prevails. And unsurprisingly, it uses a lot of monsters, but it is quite balanced because their combat patrol is, decently points dense. You can put together a 2K list for $610 because the Tyrannifex, which is $60 for 245 points. Not the best that we've seen, but certainly damn good. And putting that together, we use 3 Tyrannifexes, the Swarm Lord, a Lictor, just to round out the list, and 2 Combat Patrol Tyranids. Maxing all that out, you have both a balance of monsters and swarms, and really cool models, and puts them pretty high up in the ranking. Speaking of, let's get to the ranking. In first place, we have Custodes. Second, we have Orcs. Custodes being 365 and Orcs being 415. The Grey Knights and Genestealer Colts are tied for third at 480. The Necrons and Chaos Space Marines are tied in fourth for 500 points. The Demons are in fifth with 520 points. The World Eaters have 540 points in sixth place. Sorry, not points, dollars. Seventh place is the Eldar for $570. Eighth is Space Marines, 572, which could be a little higher, give or take. The Thousand Suns come in ninth at 590. The Tyranids come in at 10th with $610. Knights in 11th at 645. The Death Guard at 659. The Drukhari at 700. The Sororitas at 715. The Adeptus Mechanicus in 15th with 760 points. 16th is the Guard at 770. 17th is the Leagues of Votan at 840. And 18th is the Tau Empire at $875. So congratulations to the Custodes, though I wish the Orcs would have taken it. That would have been so funny. Regardless, I have been Spoons Rattling. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm going to leave a comment down below. Leave which army you would pick from this, or an army you'd like me to see start building, which I may do next year. Anyways, I've been Spoons Rattling. Hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all next time.